Okay, so this is what I expect to be my Paul Revere moment. And what I mean by that is I intend to bring a truth to you that should awaken you if you're able to comprehend it. That truth comes in the form of a discussion about freedom. The chief difference between Americans of the early 21st century and Americans of the late 18th century is this. Americans then had one very similar idea of freedom. When one American spoke to another American, it didn't matter if it was a Virginian speaking with a New Yorker or with a South Carolinian or Georgian. When one spoke of freedom and liberty, even though there were slaves in their midst, they all knew what the other was talking about. Even if the slave were in the discussion, the slave would know what freedom was about. Today, even the educated have no idea about natural law, natural rights, the origin of freedom, how government came about in the first place, or any other fundamental issue that every one of our founders knew by nature. So that's what I want to get into. Natural law and freedom. Where exactly does Thomas Jefferson get off saying that we're endowed by a creator with inalienable rights? Where does anyone say that the democracy that was created, or the version of democracy that was created, is better than any other version of government? Who is to say that our Constitution, as it was originally written, actually was good enough to withstand the test of time rather than simply a few hundred years? At the time the Articles of Confederation were adopted, everyone then thought that was the best that was possible. Turns out it could only last a few years. 10, 11, 12, depending on how you count. There's no doubt our Constitution is the greatest governing document that's ever been written. It has lasted very well for the first 230 plus years that we've been around. But it's time today to take a look at it and everything else as we look at our idea of freedom. Our Bill of Rights has the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. Those 10 rights weren't listed to begin with because the framers of the Constitution themselves were so certain that a bill was not necessary because even the federal government couldn't nearly encroach upon any of those rights listed. Because we know today, were it not for that Bill of Rights, every single one of our rights, natural and otherwise, would have been trampled long ago. Even with the Bill of Rights, our right to free speech and our right to freedom of expression and religion have all been trampled at one point or another. Even our great founder, John Adams, second president of the United States, signed into law the heinous Alien and Sedition Act, which was a direct assault on the freedom of speech. Today, there's a direct assault on the right to bear arms. And I fully believe that if we all come to an understanding about freedom, especially freedom as I understand it, that will be the greatest step in overcoming all of our issues. Because I believe freedom understood forces the American people to understand the power is theirs. For as long as we've been putting up with politicians blaming other people for their problems and accepting that as the final answer, we Americans have been basically doing the exact same thing. Blaming someone else for an obvious problem and letting the issue stop there. We can blame our politicians all we want to, but damn it, it's us that puts them in office. So whatever we get out of our government is exactly what we deserve, because long ago we stopped demanding that honor and integrity be part of our system. Long ago we took God and morality out of the public sphere. Now we rob what we rob. It's that simple. So, understanding freedom. It begins. There's a popular ironic phrase today. You do you. That means you mind your business, let me mind my business, and we'll just get along fine. We don't even have to like each other. You do you. I do me. Do you know how long it's been since I've seen anyone smoke a cigarette on a broadcast? You probably do. But you may not realize, in the 40s and 50s, before we were so educated and enlightened, people smoked all the time. Obviously now we've all been told enough times that smoking is so dangerous. Only a fool would smoke. Well, it also serves another purpose. It keeps me focused while I'm talking to you about freedom. So where does freedom begin? How do you define freedom? Where does that conversation start? It's a difficult question to answer if you don't read much, if you're not into philosophy. I, however, have been reading and into philosophy and religion for a long time, and I can tell you for certain, freedom as we know it today did not exist before Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations. Now, in that book, Smith, an economist slash philosopher, laid out some ideas, but he had no anecdotal evidence to back anything up. But he had a brilliant economic mind. He knew exactly how people would behave in a given situation if the government had just power to take money and to take private property, which is what the government of England was doing at the time he wrote. To really understand freedom, you must understand we're dealing with absolutes. Over the course of time, if you haven't already understood, you will begin to understand my stance on truth. Some things are simply absolute. Now, granted, there really is some relative truth, but even the most relative truth, if you boil it down, it also has an absolute to be learned. First question to ask yourself to understand American freedom is, can human beings own anything? That's an absolute. And the answer is not obvious. Give it some thought. Either yes or no, but either one has grave repercussions. So you must get this right. And since it is, for now, a matter of opinion, because throughout the world there has not been a definitive answer to that question, there's a little bit of leeway for economic theory. But what I believe I'm going to tell you is not so much theory as much as fact based on historical, empirical evidence. So have you decided yet? Can human beings own things? I believe they can. I believe there really is private property. I believe this really is my cigarette. I believe that if anyone were to take it from me, they would be committing an injustice against me and my natural rights. My natural right to have my thing. It doesn't matter if that thing is a stick, a ball, a house, a car, an object, a figment of my imagination, something that is actually there, something that's not actually tangibly there, doesn't matter. I believe that mine does exist. If it does, that means a whole lot. if I'm free to own something, then I'm free to achieve freedom. Simply by owning. That sets the precedent and proves that freedom is, in some way, in existence. Maybe tangibly, maybe not. We haven't defined that yet. But we know, at least, that freedom does exist to some degree if the right exists to own anything. Because if the right to own something exists, that means rights exist. The right to own something may be the only one. It may not be. We haven't gone any further yet. We don't know yet. However, if we establish that we can own something, then rights are there. Conversely, if human beings can't own anything, then we're simply animals. Another chain on an evolutionary link without a creator, without anything making us special. Thumbs don't cut it. I mean something that gives us a soul, something that gives us righteous domination over all the other creatures, something that separates us from them, beast from man. And I believe it's this existence of rights, the fact that our minds can comprehend them. That's what makes freedom exist. It exists on a plane that's not tangible, but is very real for everyone because it affects every one of our lives if we understand it. I believe if freedom is understood properly, everyone must agree with me that we have the right to defend that which is ours. If you steal from me, I have the justification to take it back from you. Because it was mine in the first place, and you took without justification. You took without being just. That is stealing. My taking what is rightfully mine is not stealing. It's in that way that we can begin to understand freedom. Freedom is not the absence of wrongdoing. It is the presence of justice and the course of injustice. The path of injustice can only stop where justice intersects. Otherwise, injustice will keep getting injustice all the way down the line. It can only stop when it's met with righteous, justified force, obstruction. You got it. So, you've just heard me explain that we can own things. But to search for truth, it is imperative that you discuss and discover the opposite of that which you have just learned. Let's take the opposite, for example. Perhaps it's not possible for human beings to own things. That's not far out. Many people believe we don't. Socialism grows as a belief, or really a system of beliefs. It grows logically from the original premise that human beings can't own. So, that idea, Marxism, being that you don't own it, so it's okay to take it, that's where it gets its roots. Human beings must decide for themselves whether or not you can own something. So let's discuss not owning. Our lives are finite. The things we try to own are not. What's the justifying thing that occurs to the ownership of an object when that ownership no longer exists? When that owner no longer exists? Are you sure that if I own something, that I can give it to someone without giving it? If you seem to me that I can own something, it's very plausible for me to say the weakness in that argument is that in order for someone else to lawfully gain that which I have, I must give it to them. If I'm dead, if I don't exist physically anymore, I don't have the capacity to give unless I've given during my lifetime, unless I've given proactively. So, by beginning on the path of maybe we can't own anything, the first logical question is, well, if I can't own, can I give? And the answer is, in my opinion, if it's not mine in the first place, I can't give it to you. So if human beings don't have the right to own, they don't have the right to bequeath to their children. If you don't have the right to give to your children that which is yours, you don't own, obviously. So if you can't will that which you own in this lifetime, you didn't really own it in this lifetime. Does that make sense? When the government, the governing authority, which uses its justification as in the will of everybody supports it, decides to take from you, well, guess what you've just done? Your right to ownership stopped. In fact, was precluded, which actually stops the government from having justification to exist in the first place. Now that's quite a leap if you look at it one way, but it's the next simple logical step if you look at it from another. In order for the argument that the sentence I just made make sense, you must understand the concept of consent of the governed. Well, that begs the question, where does the government come from? So already, to understand freedom as I understand it, as concisely as I can put it, we must ask ourselves a question and come to a concrete solution as to, can human beings truly own objects? And secondarily, what is the foundation of government? So, this episode is already almost 20 minutes long. I'm going to give you some time to think about what I've just said. And when we pick up next, we'll be discussing the origins of government. Can you answer this question? When and how was the first government ever formed? Next time on brillianttruth.com. Thank you.